So I attended an interview for a senior data analyst position last week, and just a few hours ago I received an email with the job offer, and they're offering me a salary of So I attended an interview for a senior data analyst position last week. The interview was the kind where they hit you with technical questions, business questions, and even some curveballs. They also had me complete a case study before the interview, which I presented to them. And I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened, the prep I did, the questions that came up, the tools they cared about, and also the questions I asked them to actually stand out. Chapter 1. Prep mode. Now I've got a 4-page plan that I use to prepare for any interview that I have. I've actually made a video on it, and I'll link that video up here and down in the description below. But in this case, the role was slightly more senior, and so there's two things I focused on. Number one, understanding the company, their data stack, their pipelines and bottlenecks, and number two, being able to ask them the right questions. And that's a key point I want to cover. Tailoring your questions, the questions you ask them, to the company's pain points. Read news stories. I recently reached out to a recruiter who was hiring for a position in the insurance industry, and the company she was hiring for had just introduced a suite of AI tools in conjunction with the Bank of England's Digital Securities Sandbox. And me being aware of that news story, me having done that background reading, is the reason she forwarded my application to the company. Chapter 2. Interview day. Fast forward to interview day, and I'll be honest, I don't really get nervous anymore. I've been in so many interviews, practiced over and over and over again, interviewed with different people at different companies in different industries, and even faced rejection so many times that I don't really tend to get nervous anymore. Do I occasionally get nervous? Sure. I think it shows that you actually care, but never nervous in terms of my skills and abilities, because I've practiced those so many times over the course of me being a data analyst, and I'm confident in my abilities and being able to use those abilities to plug into any team, to solve any problems they might have, and fix any issues in their workflow. So I got up nice and early in the morning, got ready, made myself a nice strong cup of coffee, and drove over to the office. A couple of bits of general interview advice. Always arrive 15 minutes early to an interview. If you're on time, you're late. This was a piece of advice that I received from a senior banker at UBS who'd also served on the board of directors for UBS. And that's not just accounting for any travel delays. You should be there 15 minutes early. Me personally, if my interview is at 9 a.m, I'm getting there at 8:30, 8:35. Number two, make sure your shoes are clean. Now that's another important piece of information I received from a hospitality director when I was working in hotels near Heathrow Airport. As much as you might think that shoes nobody's going to be looking at my shoes. That's not true. People do look at your shoes, and if you want a high-paying job, detail is very important. You're going to be working in a lot of detail. You're going to need to demonstrate attention to detail, and your first impression is also very, very important. So make sure your shoes are clean. I've sat on the hiring side of interviews, and the first impression is very, very important. If you come in with dirty shoes, then unfortunately, it could show to a potential interviewer that your attention to detail skills aren't up to scratch. Number 3, shake everyone's hand and be nice to everyone, even the receptionist. There are so many stories I can tell you where someone's come in for an interview. They've been maybe too overconfident, maybe too egotistical, and when the receptionist greets them, they've sort of looked down on them. Don't make that mistake. The receptionist talks to everyone as they come in and out of the office. So be nice to everyone. Don't lose out on a job just because your ego gets in the way and you think a receptionist is below you. And number 4, go in confident and comfortable with your abilities. Now, on the way to the office, I'd done all the prep I needed to do beforehand. And so on the drive there, I just like to zone out, focus on the drive, and put the interview in the back of my head. I'd done all I could, prep, research, practice, so there was no point in me stressing over the interview. Not overthinking the interview. So when I pull into the office parking, I go up to the door and there's 2 people who come and meet me. They take me upstairs into a conference room and get me a coffee. Chapter 3, what they asked me. So we started off with a deep dive into the case study that I'd been sent prior to the interview. The case study contained information regarding a past case where a new technology had been implemented into their team, and they'd used that technology to create a series of dashboards for one of their clients in conjunction with a piece of software. They wanted me to go through that case study and identify how I would project manage that case study. We talked about the data that went into that case. Now I would source the data, prepare the data, analyze the data, and present the data to the clients. The data issues that might come up, data governance that might come up, and how those issues would be managed. And since it was a slightly more senior role, they also talked about the regulatory compliance side of things, where I would have to make sure all analysis, all presentables and deliverables maintained regulatory compliance. The second part of that case study, prior to the interview, was creating a series of dashboards for their client, their historical client. And those dashboards had to contain specific information about their client's internal performance metrics, like KPIs, and another set of dashboards that contained financial parameters and financial information that their client could use to support their own cases and their own analysis. With that case study, there was a whole lot of industry jargon and company-specific abbreviations that I'd never come across, and I had to learn from scratch. I had to spend time before the interview learning that and getting comfortable with it. Now, case studies and pre-interview tasks, they become more common as you start applying for more senior roles within data analytics, and especially more specialist roles. I remember an interview where, as part of the pre-interview process, they'd sent me 6 months of historical company data, a lot of data, and they wanted me to create 4 distinct dashboards that served 4 particular scenarios before the interview. Now, that was a lot of work. I actually ran that task by the Power BI specialist in the team I'm currently working in, and she said that's what she does on a daily basis. That's the work she does on a daily basis. And she gets paid a lot more than what the job was offering. So back to this interview, once I'd run through the case study with them, they asked me some technical questions, a little bit about tools, Excel, Power BI, just a little bit of that, but they focused more on questioning me on the side of databases and the data sources I'd used in the past and had access to. This particular role required some understanding of Salesforce's artificial intelligence CRM and the Salesforce suite of analytical tools, which I hadn't had experience with. I'd never used Salesforce before, but it was one of the bullet points in the job description, and I'd done reading into it beforehand, so I understood to a foundational level the ins and outs of how that worked. I actually attended a Salesforce data tools seminar a long time ago. I'll be honest, they were just selling one of their new products, but that did prove to be helpful. Attending that did prove to be helpful in this particular interview scenario. Chapter 4, what I ask them. The most important part of an interview process is what you ask them. This really gives you a chance to set yourself apart from other interviewees, and it's where you make the biggest impact. My advice, my philosophy is to ask them questions that make them think. That's what I do, that's my strategy. I always ask interviewers open-ended, thoughtful questions that'll make them think. Think about it this way, if you were interviewing for a job, what would make you really be impressed with a candidate? You've probably had 50 people come through the door and interview for that position, and they've probably asked you things like, what does a typical day in the life look like? What are the training programs you offer? What are the career development opportunities that the role has? Or what are the progression opportunities of the company? Not saying those aren't good questions. They are good questions. But I like to ask them questions on top of those, like, what are some data challenges you're facing day to day? How does your team balance speed versus accuracy when you're delivering insights to a client? What's the current process in place for X type of analysis? Or is there even a process in place? What I'm trying to do, what I want for them is to think, not just answer yes or no questions. I want them to leave the interview thinking, that was an interesting question. I'd never thought of that before. Chapter 5, wrapping up. Once the interview part was over, they took me on a tour of the entire office, and I met everyone who was in that day. They showed me their SQL warehousing strategy because I'd mentioned it, I'd asked about it in the interview, and I actually ended up recommending a database they should look into for one of the specific needs that they had because I'd used that database in the past. I'd worked extensively with the senior database administrator for that database. He'd helped me in the past using that database, so I gave them his contact details. The thing that told me right then and there that I'd landed the job was the main person who was interviewing me. He mentioned to me that they didn't really have too many workflows that were set in stone, and so that the position offers a lot of autonomy. If I was to have anything an interesting workflow, an interesting process, I'd just bring it up and they could greenlight it, i.e. they'd be able to sign off on that process, that workflow that I was I was bringing up to them. Now, he didn't direct those words at me, but that's an important thing to remember. They're advertising a position, they have a need, and you're there to show them that you're better at fulfilling that need and perhaps going above and beyond than any other candidate that might come through that door. You're selling yourself, and there's a very, very small sliver of ego involved in this whole process, that I know that I'm better than every other candidate part. But there's a risk that shred of ego can spiral into overconfidence. So it has to be backed up by work and preparation. You can't expect to wing it and still get a job offer. Here's what I've learned from the 100+ interviews that I've ever done. Preparation breeds confidence. I've turned so many more interviews into job offers when I've started preparing better than any other candidate. Understanding a company's data stack gives you an edge. You want to come across as a future colleague, not just a candidate, and that comes from knowing industry knowledge, a company's data pipelines, and background information. Asking good questions equals leaving a good impression. You want to ask open-ended questions that actually make an interviewer sit there and think. And all of these 3 points are encompassed in preparation. And there you have it, the story of how I secured the role for a senior data analyst position. I'm actually interested in your stories, your interview stories, the good ones, the bad ones, what happened. I'm interested to know, so let me know down in the comments. If you want to watch the video I made on the 4-page plan I used to prepare for interviews, I'll link that up here like I mentioned and down in the description below. If you want to watch a day in the life video, I'll link the playlist down in the description below as well. Let me know if you're interested in doing something like CV reviews or asking my advice, personal advice, one-to-one. I can set up something where you book in time and we can work through your resume, we can work through a mock interview or something like that. Let me know if that's something you're interested in. I hope this video was useful. If it was, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.